The Press Darlings, the Press Darlings, Press Darlings.
Welcome to Press Darlings number 3, with Wire on the cover, though my copy is a little battered and torn. So this is the first NME, New Musical Express, that we've looked at, and there's a marked difference in style as we shall see. Sure, it's the same reviews, news and interviews, but the NME seems a little more rigid and old-fashioned, very wordy and a bit claustrophobic in its design. But in this week's, though, we have the heavy hitters from music journalism, Nick Kent and American Lester Bangs. Over on the other side, I've also shown you a record mirror from the same date, half the size of the New Musical Express, but only 3p cheaper, with Steve New of the Rich Kids on the front. So first off on the news, big news. The Sex Pistols are going to be playing 7 or 8 club dates, but they're not being advertised in the music papers, only in the local press. We've also got a Motorhead tour and film that's being done by legendary Roxy Club DJ and cameraman Don Letts, including sequences being shot in the recording studio. To me, I've never seen anything from this at all, so God knows where that's gone. Down in the corner here, looks like a great gig. Buzzcocks, Susie and the Banshees and Penetration. How cool is that? So on to the Wire. So, front page and interview. Just 10 months from forming a band, they were on a top 20 album, the Live at the Roxy Club. They signed to EMI and had a single and a critically acclaimed album, Pink Flag, released. You would think the boys would be well chirpy. In fact, the interview with Phil McNeil comes across as hard work, and they clearly don't play the rock and roll game. They don't answer questions about their past, just the music, which causes problems for the interviewer, who likes the music but doesn't know what it means, and Wire certainly aren't helping him. He says, "The 2-hour interview I did with them recently was the most arduous I've done." And he sums up the band. No image, no charisma, no mystique, no following, no gimmicks, and virtually no press. They have virtually no concern for stock punk themes like politics, for quintessential rock and roll, and the pop sensibility, and all that stuff. They are different. And to be honest, at the end of 2 pages, you're no wiser really on Wire. Next up is an article on Penetration by Paul Morley. Paul Morley was for a time in a punk band called The Negatives and managed the Drones. He has a Marmite style of writing and later was the brains behind ZTT Records and Frankie Goes to Hollywood and The Art of Noise. In his article on Penetration, the band say, "We love rock and roll and want to enjoy ourselves. We're absolutely committed to penetration and rock and roll. Rock and roll through penetration. It's very inspiring, you know, that if it's a duff gig, it's you're letting down and no one else." Morley says about the band, "Penetration seem to be one of the few groups who can get up on stage angry, not pointlessly violent, and carve out a set of solidly unpretentious hard rock without lecturing, moaning, snapping or depressing. They obviously enjoy themselves and will the audience to do likewise and not to respond blindly. Don't let anyone kid you. Penetration are one of the best bands in the country." Opposite, nice little advert there for Slaughter and the Dogs advertising their Dame to Blame single. Further on, there's a feature there on the Dead Boys. As you'll know from previous Press Darlings, the Dead Boys were in the UK touring with the Damned. In this, they are said by Roy Carr. The Dead Boys are greeted at this sparsely attended function with overwhelming apathy, except for sporadic outbursts of pogoing during Search and Destroy. Yet in their native America, this band are apparently notorious audience participation. Varies from bottles and chairs being hurled at the stage, girls being humped in time to the music over the drum kit, and singer Stiv Bators having his naked puny chest slashed open by razor-wielding basket cases. Nice. Now, one of the big ones here. An article on Sid Vicious by Nick Kent entitled "Never Mind the Sex Pistols, Here Comes the Wrath of Sid." Nick Kent was arguably a big name music journalist along with Mick Farron on the NME. They're on the wane with the new stars Birchall and Parsons. One of the key things about this article is its poignancy, because you know what happens after this. Nick Kent had been involved in the history of the Sex Pistols from fairly early on, even rehearsing with the band for a while and having dealings with Malcolm McLaren. It was Nick Kent who was going out with Chrissie Hynde while she was working in the shop Sex, and who publicly attacked her with his leather belt. Sometimes later on, an irate Sid Vicious attacked Kent at the 100 Club with a bicycle chain. Yet here he is with a feature on said Sid. The article describes a frustrated Vicious who had joined a band besieged by press and critics, making rotten paranoid, and the band kept off the road by McLaren's machinations. While Sid was ready to go full on as a pistol and embrace the lifestyle, not so the others. Kent writes, "It was the last day in November when the ugly mess finally exploded. Sid Vicious, the bass player of the Sex Pistols, had once more traipsed down to his band's rehearsal room for a much-needed repertoire brush-up, merely to encounter yet again the irksome absence of the other three members of the band. Getting back from the European tour, Vicious had got more depressed, attempting to commit suicide at his Bayswater hotel. Trying to jump out the window, he was pulled back by Nancy Spungen holding onto his belt. What followed was Vicious grabbing hold of Spungen's hair and driving her head against the wall till blood started to come out of her head. Later, police were called and they were arrested. Still, after all this, Nick seemed to not hold a grudge against Sid. He writes, "Christ, I even let the sod stay at my old gaff once, him and Nancy both, and didn't even mind when he told me he'd lost the Vaseline he usually uses on his inimitable hairstyle and used butter instead. The melting stains are all over the pillowcase." There's some talk in the article about the great rock and roll swindle, including the intended scene where Sid was to have sex with Marianne Faithfull as his mother. But one of the quotes towards the end is pretty spooky. He writes, "One ex-confidant of McLaren's claimed once, perhaps in spite as much as anything, that McLaren only took Vicious on because he would make a good image for the band when he died. A gruesome proposition. I still mentioned it to Vicious, and strangely enough his agreeable answer is quite disarmingly offhand. Yeah, maybe that's true. Maybe that's why McLaren has me in this band. I mean, I could easily end up dead quite soon. But then again, that's just my tough shit, isn't it?" In keeping with the features on the Sex Pistols and their club dates, they are pretty coming out fighting. Full-page advert that despite the bans, they will play in December. You then have Lester Bang's piece on The Clash. It's a monster three-parter entitled 6 Days on the Road to the Promised Land. Part 2 is called I Do Want a Baby Like That. Lester Bangs was an infamous music journalist from the US who kind of lived and breathed heavy drinking, journo following bands. And this feature with The Clash as they tour along with the Loos and Richard Helen the Voidoids. I'll be honest with you, it's pretty much a load of bollocks. Some of the best bits are unintentionally, I think, funny. There's a bit where Glenn Matlock plays Bangs a tape of the Rich Kids album, and Bangs goes to Matlock, "You know, you sound like the Monkees." You also have loads of young boys and girls following the band. And Bangs mentions a 14-year-old Martin of a band called Crisis, explaining why he likes them. He says, Their total physic and psychic resistance to the fascistic, imperialistic enemies of the people at all levels, and their understanding of the distinction between art and propaganda. They know that the propaganda has to be palatable to the people if they're going to be able to listen to it and to understand it and see and react to it. Except what Martin really said was, I like the Clash because of their clothes. Nobody mentioned politics, not even the Dole. Also in the feature, check out the photos of the women following the Clash, as some of them appear to have forgotten to put their clothes on. Mick Jones, though, is reportedly chaste, as he has a girlfriend whom he sees every month or so, which we assume is the lovely Viv Albertine of the Slits. To be honest with you, the whole feature is as much an American abroad in England coming to terms with licensing laws and the parochial UK music press and its impact and the various teenage subcultures like Teds and rockers and punks. The NME Readers Poll. The NME gets in early here on the 17th of December with the Readers Poll. And at the top here, Charles Shaw Murray sums it up, which is punk rock has landed big time. Listen, it's official. 1977 was the year in which the nice, neat rock hierarchies, which bossed the interim period between the end of the 60s and when the real beginning of the 70s, 1976, broke down. If you haven't already looked at the results and you're reading this bit first, stop. Just check out a few results. And it's all there. What a change a year has made. In that year, look at this. This year, the Pistols ruled. Check it out. Best band, 4th best new act, best album sleeve, 3 of the year's 10 best singles, including the top 2, 3rd best songwriters, plus they were responsible for 3 of the most important events of the year. Rotten came in 2nd as best male singer, Steve Jones runner-up guitarist, Paul Cook best drummer, and the Clash and the Stranglers came smashing in with a proverbial vengeance for the 5th and 6th best band respectively. Rattus Nevegicus scored at number 4 in the album listing, and JJ Burnell walked best bassist by a ridiculous margin over his close competitor Chris Squire of Yes. Tom Robinson grabbed best new act with the Boomtown Rats coming in 3rd, and John Peel returned to the top with a resounding recognition of his espousal of the new rock and roll, and a reward for him still having the best ears on the radio. Interestingly though, for best female singer, Gay Advert appears at number 11. Interesting. The singles review, this time by Bob Edmonds. It's a bit of a sparse affair, and he does like the sound of his own voice. It's a little bit too clever. Eddie and the Hot Rods is the single of the week with Quit This Town. He writes, these boys have found an intriguing music and amalgam, with more than the dabblings of many of those with passing cult credentials. Gross Out of the Week is the Pork Dukes with Making Bacon. Sadly disappointing. The great irony about all of this is that musically, the Dukes are simply unable to get it up. I would say the irony was that Steel Eye Span are advertising one of their nice middle-of-the-road new singles for Christmas, considering that Nigel Pegram of Steel Eye Span was involved with the Pork Dukes. The Dead Boys' Sonic Reducer is given short shrift. The Dead Boys ought to be a necrophiliac's delight, but the musical corpse they're humping is so decayed it's disintegrating. The Boys are strictly an old-fashioned heavy metal act. Death Boys is more like it. How would Chelsea fare with their second single? Their analysis of the tower block way of life is potent enough, as witness the depth of their sociological insight. High-rise living gets me down, down, down. There, in a single sentence, is the nutshell of the contemporary impasse. On to the albums. Advert there for Eater, followed by their first large review in a Music Weekly. Paul Morley reviews Eater, the album, and it surely is one of the most confusing reviews ever. Is it positive or is it negative? The NME, unlike Sounds or Record Mirror, didn't use a star rating, so you had to read the review and see what the hell they thought of it in the end. So here's Morley. Eater have always appeared a shade irrelevant, whining, riffing on the outside in all the little clubs. A curio. Eater play lots of gigs, most of which have been notoriously numbing in their immature mediocrity. Have released 3 singles, each one worse than the last. Eater are too thin and weedy in their attack, not possessing the presence or dynamics of the biggies live. They perhaps get away with it by sheer volume, but on record they come across like chipmunks. Andy Blade winds out that type of painful fifth form exercise book scribbles we all self-consciously used to write. So is it shit then, Paul? He then writes, which is of course charming. The tunes on this album are great background songs for Scooby-Doo type chases, breezy, ridiculous expressions. It's a new bubblegum sound, perfect in its irresistible fatality. What's needed is perspective. This is the first album by a young group. It is well made, it has its moments. It's not absolutely thrilling, but it's certainly far better than your Flintlock album, Eater's genuine contemporaries. Eater's next step should be to try some balancing of attitude and some intentional charm. They really could be threatening. So it is okay then. On to the gigs. Again, if it's going to be a pick here, surely would be Sham 69 at the Roxy Club over 2 nights, the 22nd and 23rd. Sham were pretty much at their peak here, white hot, so this would have been an absolute classic gig. Note also here at the Roxy Club, probably wouldn't notice it too much to look a bit closer there. You have the Pitiful and the Furs on the audition night, December the 14th. The Furs are, of course, the Psychedelic Furs, and this was one of their first gigs. On to live reviews here and gigs. There's an understated one here from the Sex Pistols in Holland by John Hurst. Great gig it comes across at, but again, matching the Nick Kent piece and what happens next, this paragraph is again telling. I spoke to the Finsbury Park Antichrist after the gig and found him very unimpressed by existence. He was completely wiped out by fatigue, as was Vicious, and saw no prospect of relief. The band's immediate intention seems to be to play to the rest of the world, 600 people at a time. Any satisfaction Rotten got out of what he's doing is being increasingly eroded by the sheer exhaustion he's experiencing and by his cynicism about the image people expect from him. Over here, always used to love this bit here where you would do your mail order records. Just one for the people, train spotters here. Parrot Records. Used to go to Colchester quite a lot. Fantastic record shop, they used to be there, and that was Parrot Records, and they did media, so a bit of a call out for them. On the other side though, the Jolt in Edinburgh by Ian Cranner. The revolution was just an illusion. You've just become another institution, child. Chant the Jolt in Everybody's the Same. A review of the Jolt in Edinburgh. It starts off, the revolution was just an illusion. You've just become another institution. Chant the Jolt in the song Everybody's the Same. How true, and how ironic. The Jolt are the Scottish 3-piece new wave outfit who signed with Polydor just before the bottom fell out of the punk market. The band went south to London and promptly disappeared. I really hope the Jolts don't miss the boat, and it's going to be mighty interesting to see if the much vaunted raw energy and honesty remains as valid in the next few months as they were in the last few. The Jolt would soon ditch their punk credentials, hop onto a power pop mod look and be suited, release an album and eventually fade away. Ian Cranner is busy up there in Scotland, and we also reviews the Rezillos in Edinburgh. The Rezillos put on an absolute majestic performance with their energetic stage act led by Eugene Reynolds and Fay 5. And to Ian Cranner, it seems the Ramones are in severe danger of being upstaged. The two bands have basically the same approach, carrying on the great pop tradition from where it left off in the 60s, delivering hot songs with 70s aggression and incredibly concentrated energy. The Rezillos would be the support for the Ramones on their tour that would finish off with 2 nights at the Roundhouse over the new year. Interesting here in the also the for sale section where you used to get the various clothes and cheap punky outfits. Everyone's trying to cash in, and off we go here. Punk 78 starts to hear the first punk rock calendar. And that's your lot.
The press darlings, the press darlings, press